So here we have some requested information about the conduction system. Now, my heart, which we went through last week, is called a myogenic heart. And the reason why this is that it creates its own impulse. It's not connected via the central nervous system as we would say need a muscular contraction from my biceps. So it creates its own electrical impulse. Now the electrical impulse will change in its pace depending on requirements, and this is done through systems called the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems. But relating to the heart, it's called myogenic. Now, some of these terms we can change across to being slightly less scientific, and you'll be able to get an understanding of what it is. So what we have here is we have an outline of the heart, which is in this blue and orange colour here. And the conduction system is a layer of nerves that sit within the heart. Now this here is what you would get if you had an ECG, a scan on your heart to make sure that all things were flowing correctly and strong. Now this one here, the sinoatrial, the SA node, you might be able to infer that sits on top of the atrium, one of those first components of the heart. Now just to remind you again, we do things backwards, so this is left and this is right. Now as we go through it, this sinoatrial node is called a pacemaker. That's another word that we have it, and that's what kick-starts the electrical impulse within the heart. That will decide if that's faster or slower. So if I wanted my heartbeat to go faster, maybe as a result of exercise, the SA node would start clicking much quicker. As we move our way down, you see we get to this atrioventricular node. So that sits just above the ventricles, the right ventricle. And this is where it separates down. We separate it into a left side and a right side. And you can see the stream here goes down. If you remember from the labelling we did last week, that's the septum. It separates the right and left heart. So it starts to split into two. So it goes SA node, AV node, and then we've got these bundle of his. Okay? When we get to the bundle of his, it then separates into left and into right. Then we have our bundle branches, you can see here. And then the Purkinje fibres is where the electrical impulse is going to come out at the end. Now you can see that the density level of the Purkinje fibres on the right side of the heart is significantly lower than that on the left-hand side of the heart. And the reason for that is because this left-hand side of the heart is oxygenated blood. And it is heading to working muscles. So it needs a really strong contraction to be able to travel that distance. If this is oxygenated blood, then this blood on the right-hand side of the heart is deoxygenated. So it would be heading via the pulmonary artery to the lungs to become oxygenated. So it hasn't got the same distance to travel, so therefore it doesn't need this high density of Purkinje fibres. So if you relate the two, you can see we get this very small impulse, which is P, and that is the AV node. We then have a delay, and this delay is 0.1 seconds, and that is to ensure that the blood moves from the atriums down into the ventricles. Then we get this huge impulse, which is OR, and that is when it is the ejection of blood from the right and the left-hand side of the heart. And then we have what's called repolarization, which is we're going back to the start again. So it is a layer of nerves embedded in the heart in order to ensure that there is constant and rhythmical. And if you had issues with the regularity of your heart rate, it would be this is where you would be connecting the pacemaker if it was due to a regular heart rate. So just to recap, the heart is myogenic. It creates its own impulse. It starts at the SA node, travels down to the AV node, then it splits, does a bundle of his, splits into bundle branches, and the Purkinje fibres is where there is the electric impulse at the end, which causes that final contraction of the ventricles, both left and right. And then try to remember without looking back, is that distal or is that systole? And that was one of the tasks that we looked at previously. If you'd like to go into this further, what you would research from here would be the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems and how they affect the regularity of the SA node firing.